pressed.
Button is pressed,
Yeah.
but not my pants.
And
Do
neither
you
are
do,
mine.
do you iron clothes?
I used to when I gave a crap.
I did when I was in the army, but I haven't ironed anything since. Oh, we're live.
Oh, crap. I said crap twice already. We'd like to welcome you all, our adoring, nonchalant, casual, everyday, regular old good folks that come and hang out with us. We are happy that you're here. This is the Trampled Underfoot podcast show, and we're live. We are live.
We're live because it beats the alternative. So, how's things going in Florida? I understand you guys are getting pretty beat up with weather back there.
Yeah, we have all sorts of things, and I've had all sorts of issues going on here,
Mhm.
household wise, and just a bunch of stuff. My dog's been under the weather as well, and
Oh,
yeah, so I've been keeping an eye on him. And then I've been running errands, and it's been difficult because just traffic and stuff, just a bunch of stuff. But um, you know, those are first world problems at the
yeah,
same
I hear you. I yay, got my driveway extension finished.
time.
And
Nice.
so I'm a happy guy. I'm not, for the first time in close to 5 years, I'm not moving gravel and I have no gravel out front to move. So, you know what that means, don't you?
Yeah.
I got to order another truckload of gravel.
Have you ever heard that in life? Didn't your folks ever tell you, son, never gravel?
Well, they didn't have to get a quote on a concrete driveway. You know,
Can I
every house they moved into already had a driveway.
can I grovel over the gravel?
You can, because the price of concrete will make you have a fit.
The other day I was groveling over the gravel.
Mhm.
Um, I like those sentences that go on. There's a few of them that go on. I mean, I don't have any in mind. I just said
Yeah.
that because my brain went in that direction. But
What do you call that? It's not an alliteration. What do you call that? Oh gosh, I can't remember what they call that. There's a word for it, and I can't remember it. That's okay.
it's called in,
Yeah,
in an unknown language that I just invented.
yeah, something like that.
I've got two things to say,
Okay,
or that fall in different categories.
okay,
One of them I'll leave to the side, although it's some juicy stuff. But the other one is still very interesting.
okay.
So, um, back in 80 something, 82, I think it was, my father took me to see Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Okay.
I think it was 82. Um, and if I'm not mistaken, we saw it at the Ambassador Theater over here. But, it could have been at another theater, but just the same. Since then, there's been like three, and then just recently a fourth was released, or a fifth
Hmm.
of Indiana Jones. But um, back when Harrison Ford, probably one of your favorite actors to a degree, because he
Yeah,
was involved in that one movie that you like, American Graffiti.
American Graffiti. Yeah,
Um, Back then in '82 or whatnot, whenever that movie came out, he was already like 35 or 36 years old.
yeah,
That's pretty crazy stuff.
yeah.
Because I was picking my there's a word that I was, but I'm not going to use it because it's too raunchy. Picking my nose, let's say. But I was going to use an actual specific word. I was still a little kid,
Yeah.
figuring out everything that I could not even imagine. Well, and yet he was this bigger than life star on the movie screen, and it
Hmm.
was something that consumed one's imagination for sure. Let me open the door for the dog. And so since then he's done what, like, how many Indiana? I don't know if you've seen all the Indiana Jones after.
I've seen up to number 4, Crystal Skull.
Okay, I didn't like Crystal Skull too
Me
much.
either.
I liked the third one a lot.
Hmm.
The second one I didn't like as much as the first and second one and
Let,
third one.
let's be honest. The second one was dog dirt. That's all there is to it. The second one was a major disappointment.
It was
I
too comedy like.
I used to pride myself. I used to say that Harrison Ford never made a bad movie. And then along came Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Well, you can't say that anymore. He did make a bad movie.
Well, the recent movie came out,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people are panning it. Other people like it, and critiques have their way because some people. I mean, critics are critics.
Yeah.
Um, and so they're gonna get into the weeds on it,
Mm-hmm.
and they're gonna slice it up to such a degree that it'll be what it is. But
Sure.
there's an opening scene in the new one. They
Okay.
say, and there's clips and stuff where they've used computer technology, AI technology, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
in order to return Indiana Jones to his heyday,
Okay.
where they youthify him,
Mm-hmm.
like if he was back in season one,
Yeah.
of the Lost Ark, and all that. And so the reason I bring it up is that within all that, a lot of AI has been popping up, and I ran across um, people, and actually you early on sent me a link because it restores people's faces and stuff on
Mm-hmm.
damaged photos. Um, so all that's part of it, but they have all different types of AI. Some of them are word type text AI,
Mm-hmm.
text to speech AI, image AI, all sorts of stuff.
Sure.
And they amalgamate all images from the internet in order to give you what you want from the keywords that you use or the prompting that you use to create the thing.
Right.
Something really weird, though, has occurred. And you've probably heard a little bit about it, but this is what I'm going to share with you and see what you think. And it's kind of a little bit tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I ran across just the other night Freddie Mercury singing um, Europe, the final
Yeah.
countdown. I witnessed Frank Sinatra singing Thriller.
Uh-huh.
I witnessed, to top it off, the Beatles reimagined through AI, where they taught the vocals, they taught the computer, or the computer taught itself, the vocal strategies of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and so on,
Mm-hmm.
the musical style, creating absolutely brand new versions of them using the same frequency, attitudes, and styles. It wasn't perfect in terms of um, right now and whatnot, but it was good enough that they created new versions of stuff and even cross pollinated musical styles with different artists that no longer are around.
Mm-hmm.
Here, they even, for goodness sakes, they even had Trump singing a I think the song is called Viva la Vida or something like that from a more modern band that came out in the early 2000s. And it's Trump.
La Vida Loca.
No, it's not La Vida Loca. This is
Okay.
a European band.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of an alternative band, I want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Like a little bit rough, but no, not a little bit. Some of their songs are rough, but their lead guitar or their lead thing is a lot of piano, and then the sing. I forget the name of the band.
Okay.
I had one of their albums um, back then, one of the last that I collected. Um, they have Trump singing in Trump's actual voice, the actual melody, and it
Mm-hmm.
just sounds like Trump singing, but not cheaply done.
Mm-hmm.
It's like someone that would have had Trump's tone
Mm-hmm.
and pauses in his speech the way he does,
Mm-hmm.
singing a song. And I just sat there through all that I just told you, blown away. So
Yeah.
my question is, what do you think of it? And if you can create 100 new Beatles songs, they're not the Beatles, but they're adjacent because they're using all the qualities that the Beatles existed. What does the future look like?
Oh, there's a lot to unpack there. And oh wow. Just taking your question because it made me think of a couple of questions myself. Um, just taking your questions at face value, what I think of it is a mixed bag. There's good and bad to it. We all wonder what a 1976 Beatles album would sound like, or a 1982 Beatles album would sound like. What if Stevie Ray Vaughan hadn't got on that helicopter? What if Jimi Hendrix or Janis Joplin hadn't overdosed that day?
Mm-hmm.
What would have happened? So there is a certain amount of curiosity there. So the music fan or the fan of that band or the fan of that music or that artist says, wow, this could be cool. But another part of me says they have a catalog of work that they've done. It's enough. Robert Johnson did 29 songs, I want to say. It was enough. You know, the Beatles put out a certain number of records. That's their catalog. It's enough. Let's leave it alone now. Because this is the other question. It doesn't matter who does it. I see Jamie Page out here is saying Paul McCartney is working on bringing out the last Beatles record now using AI to recreate John Lennon's voice. Okay, that's great. But is it the Beatles? I would submit, even though Paul McCartney's at the helm, and even though, let's say, the music is stuff that they had already recorded, maybe it's some missing parts of certain tapes that he's finishing the songwriting and stuff like, is it the Beatles? I would submit it really isn't. You
Um,
know,
I have something to say about that, but I'm looking for a link. I
I
have
mean, you know, it may be. Wow, this really is a dilemma because part of me says this is cool, run with it, and another part of me says no, leave it alone. Leave it alone. There are some things that really should just be left be. You know, and it's the same thing with actors and movie stars. I mean, uh, pick a movie star that passed away 10 years ago. If you bring them back in a new movie, do we really do we really need another John Wayne Western?
yeah.
Now,
Well,
that's not to say that it wouldn't be cool, but you know, and the other thing that it leads me to is who owns the rights to it? If you or I could use AI to create a new Beatles song, it's not the Beatles. It sounds like the Beatles. It's played like the Beatles, but it's not the Beatles.
it's Beatles adjacent.
Do we have the rights to that? Now, if you wrote the music and the lyrics, you would have the rights to those. But who has the rights to that? You know, is there any such thing as having the rights to a sound? You know?
It's complicated because every other band in the 60s, arguably, in retrospect,
Mm-hmm.
how could I say? When the Beatles came out, regardless of what Greg might be thinking, every other band, according to them being interviewed after the fact and during the age of the Beatles, and even as late into, I mean, you could find endless,
Sure.
were inspired by the
Mhm.
Beatles.
And some were straight up ripoffs of the Beatles. You know, Paul Revere and the Raiders, the Monkees. I mean, listen to the sound.
What I'm
The
trying to get, what
the
I'm trying to
minute
get,
the minute the Beatles became popular, everybody ran to the nearest guitar store to get a 12-string Rickenbacker electric because
but
that was the sound.
let me answer your question. The moment that these people heard the Beatles
Hmm.
and then they started copying it
Hmm.
out of inspiration, meaning maybe one band would have taken a string of notes, no
Hmm.
pun intended,
Hmm.
and maybe a poetic lyrical thing
Hmm.
and combined them, it had its own sort of quality to it. But you could the artist himself knows exactly all the rip-offs that he or she
Right.
does in an album. Um, all Western music, and not even Western music, but since we're talking about, is a
Hmm.
total. If you were in the head of these musicians, everything is a rip-off. The problem is that, I mean, rip-off is harsh, but what I'm saying is, um, it's like you can't. It's like that song, "Nothing from nothing leaves nothing."
Yeah, Billy
You better get
Preston.
some.
Yeah.
Um, they received information musically from this group, and then they reacted to it, but they're drawing from it. And you could say, well, it's just an inspiration. If it gets too close,
Hmm.
then it's enough close that it's a rip off, and so we're gonna sue or this or that.
Well,
But just let me wrap this up.
okay.
But what I'm saying is that all these bands self admit where in not all of them to the degree of what I'm going to say, but they all admit it in a general sense. But some even go as far as saying, "I took that line from this part of this
Oh,
song. Oh,
sure.
and that line is from that song." So, um, and yet they're inspirations
Yeah,
of the original.
and that's a good point because inspiration is one thing and a direct ripoff is a direct ripoff. That's quite another thing, you know. Um, but you said something back there, and I had something to add to it, and I can't remember exactly what it was now. Oh, we were talking about this behind the scenes one time when we get on a roll and we have to get a thought out. And there's a lot of things to unpack. I
Mm-hmm.
am that guy. I forget some of the questions I had.
Because I took you on
Dang it.
this road
But
trip.
yeah, but it was along the lines of what you're talking about. But taking inspiration from a band. Okay, I remember what I was going to say. We were talking about um, is a sound is that uh, can you make that a trademark or a copyright? I totally forgot that's already been ruled on in court when John Fogerty released the album Center Field. His old manager, who owned the rights to all of Creedence Clearwater Revival's music, sued him for plagiarism. And the judge ruled you can't sue somebody for sounding like theirself. A person cannot plagiarize themselves because his old manager put forth that this album sounds like Creedence Clearwater Revival, and I own the rights to all their music. The judge said, yeah, but this man wrote all that music. You can't plagiarize yourself. Case dismissed and threw it out of court. So that has been ruled upon if you're the person who wrote it in the first place. But if you write a song and then use AI to have Paul McCartney sing it, could Paul McCartney come after you? Maybe for using his likeness, but could he come after you for using his sound? If there's no imagery to it, it's just an audio file. Could he come after you for that? I
No, and
don't
somebody
think
can also
that's
look like Paul McCartney.
well, that's true. That's true. In
You can
fact,
have a band that looks like John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and I mean, look,
oh yeah, I mean,
that
there's a whole
question,
bunch of tribute bands that do that.
that question, is one of them. But now the computers are doing that, where they're
Mhm.
taking. There was a guy that spent, I don't know how long, inputting all the data of all the Beatles songs and styles and this and that, and created I don't know how many hundreds of songs, brand new Beatles songs, let's say, using the styles and whatnot and this and that. So they're not Beatles, but at the same time, it rings enough bells in a person's hearing,
Hmm.
listening, where you're like, oh well, hell, that's the Beatles, but it's not the Beatles, but it is the Beatles.
Right.
Back in the day, when we go to the store and we'd pick out the comics, there was and it was an older comic book that was released back in the '80s again
Hmm.
with new issues,
Hmm.
which was called What If.
Hmm.
And in the What If comic books, you had what if Spider Man and Lizard Man confronted themselves instead of what really happened in the
Yeah.
real, timeline.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like alternate timelines. What if the Hulk were to have lost all his powers, or what if, whatever?
Yeah.
And what if the Daredevil regained his sight, and just all these things, and this alternate universe type thing. So this is sort of like when you said, what would they have sounded like if they wouldn't have perished in that plane crash?
Hmm.
The Big Bopper,
Yeah.
or
Richie Valens and yeah, Buddy
what
Holly.
would have happened if? So this is computerizing the what if scenario that I was mentioning with the comic books and stuff. It's not them, but it's adjacent in
Yeah.
terms of little bits that the computer's been able to bottle up
Hmm.
like an essence, or at least near the essence, because you only receive, like when John Lennon would sing. Let me open the door for my dog. Go ahead, baby. When John Lennon would sing, we receive the singing, but we don't know what he was thinking, the spirit behind the singing, um, and why he would do what he did vocally, um, and what happened that day at lunch,
Yeah.
and how he wrote the song, and what changes he made to this. We don't know all the other stuff. We just know the end result that we receive. So to us, that's the spirit contained in there. But there's more to that quality of John Lennon, now deceased, than just the offering that we received on the radio. And therefore, this computer thing is receiving that final information in so many calculations, and then creating something adjacent to it, and we're receiving that and saying, "Oh, well, wait, that's quite similar to John Lennon." But so it's kind of,
Well,
that's what
the,
it's doing. It's picking out all these. Like, there will come a time, it seems, where, like what we talked about that one time, where they'll recreate your face
yeah.
and your movement. Like your X amount grandkids in the future
Hmm.
will say, let's see what Mark Lindsay,
Hmm.
sometime in 2285,
Yeah.
they'll say, let's see what Mark Lindsay. Well, actually, it's funny. They won't have to do that because they've got, considering,
Here I am, kids,
considering, right,
warts and all.
yeah, considering that we're doing this live for X amount of years. So there's, but there's plenty of information on Mark Lindsay's facial,
Sure.
particulars, tweaks,
Hmm.
reactions when words are received, and all these things. Where if they were to take all that information, put it into a computer program, they'll recreate your ass,
Yeah.
and they can have you,
Well,
telling the tale of your family's history.
they sure could.
You
They
know.
sure could. You have done short videos of that.
Hmm.
I've seen you have posted them on YouTube where you'll have your grandmother telling her story,
Hmm.
her basic bio. I was born here, this date. My family was this, and we did this, that, and the other.
Right.
And now it's a very short video because what you know about them is limited, but still, someone else could take that and run with it. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. And that's why I was talking about going into the movies because it's not that big of a leap. If you can have a computer write a new, and yeah, who's to say you have to write the music? The AI could write the music. The AI could write the lyrics. You just tell it what you want it to write. And
Right.
it could do it all in the style of. So you don't have to have really the only creative input from you are the search terms, are the queries, you know, and but
And
that get
refining them.
exactly and refining it. But then again, that gets back down to it because everything is a conglomeration of what's already out there. Who owns it? You know?
Yeah. But if and Jamie Page just said,
Mhm.
and welcome to She Makes.
Howdy.
And Jamie Page said that Paul McCartney is now fixing to release a song where John Lennon's voice is recreated so they could do what they do. Um, right there, Paul McCartney is working on bringing out the last Beatles record now and using AI to recreate John Lennon's voice. Okay, so um, if so if you think of Paul McCartney, you said earlier,
Mhm.
and I agree with you. At least that's my instinct. Leave well enough alone. You have the Beatles catalog. That's plenty enough for us to enjoy in terms of having a computer um, create this thing that feels to us from the 20th century as slightly unnatural, and maybe creepy in some sense. I mean, you yourself have said, "Man, that creeps me out when I've put up my ancestors moving about and whatnot."
Yeah, it's about 50% awesome and 50% creepy. I still don't know what to think about it.
Well, because we're not from that
Yeah,
era.
we're not insiders. Yeah.
We didn't grow up. But if you were to have grown up, and if we were to have grown up with these things, these tools available, and like let's
Hmm.
say a kid's playing out with his bike
Yeah.
and rushes back home and says, "I wonder what my eighth, 10th grade." Just imagine this. This is a little overblown, but just imagine if one thing is possible, any number of things is possible, especially considering the tools that we have at our disposal right now.
Yeah.
So even if it sounds a little bit wacky, it's not within the realm of the unimaginable. So imagine a kid hundreds of years from now is running around playing bike. If bikes ever exist back in the future, maybe
Hmm.
at that time they're levitating. Ooh, who knows? But let's say um, he runs back in and says, "You know what? For whatever reason, um, computer or whatever, and bring up the screen, and I want to see my eighth back when great great grandfather, and I want him to tell me a story with all the information drawn from, like, say, that grandfather, and
Hmm.
then it has it.
Yeah.
Hi, little Timmy. He says, Grandpa, tell me a story about back then when you were whatnot and this and that. He says, well, back in 1839, what happened was this in America at that time. And so that computer program is pulling from all the information gathered in that stored, the world at large through computers. And it's using all that to qualify what he offers and not. And according to the kid responding to the conversation, he could adjust the grandpa recreated on the screen or whatnot, or in midair. Like, let's say it's not even a screen, it's like a projection type thing, like some sort of
Hologram.
hologram, and you can say, "Well, Timmy, you know what, and how are you doing and stuff," and like wherever it doesn't have the information to add, it'll fill in the blanks with enough data that it ties one known fact about that grandfather to the other, and in this missing stretch, he'll use colloquial whatnots that would be the main average of what people would say to fill in the blank. So you're not
Yeah.
getting your actual great, 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 but what you're getting is a what if in a very vivid manner.
Do you remember the old choose your own ending books?
Oh yes, I loved. I used to. Oh, I used to love those.
That this sounds like a 25th century version of that, because with the technology that you're talking about, if a kid is like, yeah, but I don't want to hear about the horse and buggy, I want to hear about the battles you were in. Oh, well,
Well,
Timmy.
your grandma used to say.
Yeah, well, Timmy, the biggest battle I was in was when grandma chased me out of the kitchen with a cast iron skillet. But my neighbor,
Yeah.
so you are kind of doing a choose your own mystery thing,
Hmm.
choose your own history. And that's just as scary as the technology. Because if you can rewrite your own history that way, your own personal history to suit your wishes, who's to say that that is wrong, that that's not real, that that didn't happen,
Hmm.
you know? So, yeah, there are some cautionary tales to go along with this. But, I don't know. I think that somebody like, and I'm seeing some, comments in over here in the chat. What about the Elvis song they did a while back? Excuse me, a little less conversation. Didn't they use something to make that? I'm not familiar with it, Robin. I don't know.
I am. A little less conversation was an old
I
song.
remember the song.
They just upgraded it to a dance beat. So
Oh,
they
okay.
they extracted Elvis's song. But people have been able to extract different frequencies from songs
Hmm.
to eliminate all the other elements in a song and
Isolated
extract
vocals. Yeah.
isolate the vocals and whatnot. And so they did something similar with Elvis in order to make an upbeat, whatnot, modernized thing. And it's been successful. I like it.
Hmm.
It's not a. It's a more mechanical yet computerized way of doing. We're talking about an extreme, what I just mentioned, the scenario, but
Okay.
they've been doing this mechanically since, well, that and probably before, actually before, because they took so here's the thing. Anytime, this is stretching it, but it's not really, because it falls within the concept.
Hmm.
Anytime someone does a documentary on the Roman Empire
Hmm.
or on Emily Dickinson, where they gather all their files,
Hmm.
they review it, they put it together, and then they offer it to the person. They hire an actress or whatever, and she plays the part of Emily Dickinson, let's say,
Hmm.
and the viewer is watching this. There are X amount of viewers out there that, depending, many that will say this is a recreation, and
Hmm.
I'm watching a a a painting of the original, extracted from what people today know according
Right.
to historical documents. But there's any number of people out there, I would imagine, I would bet money on it, that internalize that experience of watching that documentary to the
Hmm.
degree where that person playing Emily Dickinson is to them the reference point of Emily Dickinson,
Yeah.
to the point where
Yeah.
any little um, missteps in the documentary's telling, or the house she was occupying because that's the set that they were using, it becomes real to them.
Right.
But it's not real. It's a
Right.
similitude of it's a facsimile of the original.
Right. And I think that that is implied when they call something a drama. This is
Well,
not
yeah,
presented as a documentary, so that is implied that some
but
artistic license has been taken.
remember the reason. So I mentioned that I would assume many people would understand this, but there's going to
Right.
be a segment
Right.
that
There's
will
going to be a yes,
that will blend things, and it will become a history. So the point of it is that we know that when we read a book, historically speaking, it's a recounting of events.
Right.
So we know that what's on the plate is according to the person that's writing it, and the
Right.
information they brought to bear concerning the
Yes.
topic.
And you can only hope on the accuracy. You can only speculate, because unless there is somebody right there writing down every word said, nobody knows the conversations that were had. Nobody
Lem-
knows.
Give me a second. Give
Okay.
me a second. I'm sorry.
Here's where I tap dance. Nobody nobody knows exactly how Emily Dickinson talked to her next door neighbor. So some artistic license has to be taken. I don't know. What's y'all's opinion? I know we're kind of bouncing around a little bit here,
Forgive me. I'm
but
just keeping an eye on my dog. I'm sorry.
as I was saying, unless somebody was sitting there writing down things word for word as they transpired, nobody knows how Emily Dickinson talked to her neighbor. Nobody knows if she ever had any interaction with the letter carrier when she collected her mail, or did somebody else do that for her? So you miss so much. So any conversation presented in this drama is going to have to be speculation. It's got to be fictional unless somebody was there and writing it down. If something came out of somebody's diary, that is a frame of reference.
There's also another problem. Go ahead. Go ahead.
But there has to be some artistic license taken, and that's usually up to the author of the screenplay or the book that the screenplay was taken from.
When a when the the original lore
Mm-hmm.
and stories
Mm-hmm.
were passed down not in writing but in word of mouth
Mm-hmm.
around campfires and
Yeah.
houses and huts and whatever. And just like the game telephone, you know that things get dropped off and stuff. Um, and that changes the context slightly, maybe, and this and that. But there's a gem that keeps being passed forward. So, for instance, um, we always knew that my great granduncle on my father's maternal side stumbled upon a golden chest, or a golden chest, a chest filled with gold. Could you imagine he stumbled upon a golden chest? That would have
Oh
been a
yeah.
story.
Yeah.
Could you imagine the chest itself with
Well,
gold?
yeah. Stumbling on a chest full of gold wasn't good enough. It had to be a golden chest too.
Yeah. Well, see, I did it right there. But I did what I was about to explain. He stumbled upon a chest, dug it up, and it had who knows what, because information unknown. It had Spanish gold coins. And he fabricated jewelry that he passed on to the family. My grandmother received some, and other young received some, and he was landowner and this and that. There's a whole story with that. But what I received from my folks growing up
Mm-hmm.
was snippets as I was running and bouncing across the walls, wanting
Mm-hmm.
to go outside and play with my friends. And I received information in that manner, firsthand information from them.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother actually was there, but now at my level, all I have is like a cutout that was torn from the notebook,
Mm-hmm.
a little sliver, and even the word ordering of how they explained it to me is gone. What I
Yeah.
have is the memory that I can paste together in my fashion.
Right.
So if historically speaking, I would have the ability, if historically speaking they chose me to tell the tale, um or I wrote it down now, let's say, like I wrote it down now, and they put, I would be a primary source or a secondary source or something within a near, because it's the guy that knew the person,
Mm-hmm.
part of the family.
Right.
So they would use that as evidence to
Right.
support whatever story they're writing. But in the case of this story, as an example, even though they're using me as some sort of primary or secondary reference,
Mm-hmm.
let's say 100 years or 200 years in the future, um, all the detail missing and all they're getting is my retelling of what was told to
Right.
me with all the missing components. So that's as good as it gets.
Right. And anything that goes deeper into that, because you don't know the conversations that went on during the time, I'd be willing to bet your grandmother couldn't remember half of it. She would know the salient points, but there is so much lost because of our faulty memories or just lost to the dust of time, you know? So that would have to be it. Let's say you wrote a screenplay about the whole thing, the discovery and what happened afterwards. You would have to embellish it in order to have conversations within that storyline. You would have to insert your own biases and your own personality into it, because that's what we are. We are our biases, our speculations, our own personality. And that's all we can project, you know. Now you may have other people who have other information and you collaborate with them, but each one of you is going to have your own certain level of speculation and biases and think, no, I don't think he would have done it that way. He'd have probably done it like this. But what did he say to the chief of police when the chief of police came out to look at this chest? Well, we don't know. So
Yeah.
we have to make something up. So,
So using this as an example,
mm-hmm.
this particular thing, the leftovers from that story, let's say the golden chest story, golden chest. I did it again.
Good enough.
I just smash them together and say good enough is good enough. Um, I offer that generalized
Mm-hmm.
Picture,
Mm-hmm.
and all those intricate parts
Mm-hmm.
have disappeared. So
Yeah.
we have a main concept. Gold in a chest was found in Cuba, dug up by great grand uncle Benito. He was a landowner.
Mm-hmm.
Was he a landowner? See, now I don't know. Was he a landowner? My assumption, one, is that he was already a landowner, because they did say, if I read because he found it on his land, so he was already a landowner. Did he buy more land? Because he ended up having a lot of land. Did he buy more land after the fact? He would have probably, because, and all that stuff, unless we open up some sort of I can tie a imagery in my mind of what would have happened, but that's just me assuming a picture, and it falls within me assuming a picture of what could have happened, but it's not the truth of the matter. And a lot of this stuff, mind you, there's a difference between, like, let's say Elvis's son, if that, or his daughter now passed away, if she sits down and tells a story of her dad,
Mm-hmm.
that's way different than if somebody 100 years later sits down and talks about Elvis,
Yeah.
because it's now so as good as it gets concerning his daughter
Mm-hmm.
telling the story. That's closer to the event, and even that will have missing pieces, but the general
Sure.
gist is passed on and so on. So that's all that. But now you have a computer. Last thing I'll
Yeah.
say.
I
Now,
was getting ready to bring that into it.
well, go ahead. Let me close the door. Forgive me, because my dog, I don't want him to do the pee pee inside. Nobody
Okay.
wants that. Forgive me.
So Vigo is under the weather, so he's having to be a little bit more attentive to his dog uh, right now. Sorry about that, folks. But yeah, that opens up some other interesting questions for like you have that story, you have the information that you have. Maybe other people can help you flesh out a few more details, but now you inject AI into it and you feed that story into an AI and let it write a script for you. Maybe with dialogue, maybe without dialogue. Maybe it's a 1920s silent classic or 1910s silent classic, and where you're just presenting the information and there's not a whole heck of a lot of dialogue involved other than wow, lucky us, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Someone else can then take your production that you've already created and expand on that. And next thing you know, you do have a major motion picture. I'm just throwing it out there. Now, you don't have to play that scenario over in your mind because to me that's always been the great thing about books is it lets me picture the scene the way I want to picture the scene. If we're talking four torpedo boats out in the Philippines during World War II, I can picture that in my mind. And then, it was night. Okay, so now I got to switch over. It was dark and it was storming. Okay, now I got to switch over to that. It's storming. But I can picture that. It's my brain making it up, it's my imagination running wild with it. But now you're throwing this information into an AI that's going to put a conglomeration of what torpedo boats look like in the Philippines at night during a storm in 1943 or 4. You know, so I have to rely on them to get it right. Whereas in my brain, I don't have to. I have to rely on myself to get it right. And I could be right or I could be wrong, but it doesn't matter at that point because it's just my own imagination. You, however, don't have as much control over that AI. You can tell it to try again, but it's just going to draw more information from what it knows about that scenario.
No, no, no. It's massive. Here's the problem.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. It's going to draw again from what it knows of that area in Cuba, of what gold Spanish coins look like, of that vintage, of what a chest of about that era would look like,
Yeah.
and what it was your great uncle, you said,
My great granduncle.
great granduncle, and what he looked like, and the scenario so it's gonna no, actually, Jim, I did not read PT 109. I read They Were Expendable. I highly recommend it. It's it's gonna take all those outside influences, and you are less in control, is what I'm getting at.
Now let me clear something up.
Mm.
You could have all that you just said
Mm-hmm.
and not be satisfied because that's not what you're intending. Whatever you're intending, you can
Yeah.
input into the computer.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to limit it from being descriptive so that it allows you to fill in the blanks,
Mm-hmm.
that's how massive this is what I was going to say earlier,
Okay.
that it's not just doing one thing.
Right.
It's not just going for just
Okay.
this perfectness. What it's doing is it's allowing you to input so many things for it to consider. So if you have that particular
Mm-hmm.
where you're like, I'm not satisfied with that because books let me read and fill in the blanks in my imagination, um, you could limit whatever it is the project involved. You can limit that AI from not calculating certain things or not. So
Right.
you so it's not just going in the direction of it replacing your. It's doing everything,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not just going from, let's say, yours or mine or anyone's limited reference point, because our reference points are limited to our experience and what we've consumed. This
Right.
AI draws from all available experiences. You can ask it historically accurate according to historical.
Right.
You could
And
go so deep into it. So eventually, um, I don't know. I don't. So the two things, you can always read a book, is what I'm saying.
well, yeah, understood. Understood. And please don't get me wrong. I don't have a problem with AI for this type of a project per se. In fact, I think it's a good thing for this type of a project. And
Which
even
type?
for, well, doing something along the lines of telling the story of um, something like your great granduncle,
Mm.
telling that story. I don't have an issue with that. I think it's a good thing. I really do. Because we hear so much about family folklore, and believe me, I have heard my share of family folklore. About, I would say, a third of it has proven to been just false. It was either embellished to the point to where the story was changed completely, or it was completely turned around and upside down, almost to the point of a flat out lie. It never happened. Some of that was due to mistakes. Some of that was due to people having partial information and then jumping to a conclusion. And part of that was just due to folks just plain and simply embellishing a story to where it was completely overblown.
But in order for you to be able to say that you just said,
Mm-hmm.
that over embellishment, flat out lies,
Mm-hmm.
or what looks like flat out lies, for you to be able to sit here and explain that
Mm-hmm.
requires someone to have dug through and somehow, you know what I'm saying, discovered what's
Yeah,
wrong and what's, so it's still,
exactly.
yeah.
But so using it, that's what I'm getting at. Using it to set the record straight, I think is a good thing. I'll give you an example. Um, it was rumored that my three times great grandfather came out west with his brother during the California Gold Rush. And the brother died of cholera. And grandfather just kind of went off his nut a little bit and said, screw this gold rush thing, and jumped on a boat and was shipwrecked on the coast of Mexico and walked from Mexico to Missouri. Just walked back, basically, where he settled and then finally married and then came out on one of the wagon trains in the late 1860s after the Civil War. That whole story was made up. It is not factual at all. He did have a brother who got married before they came out west. He did die. He was killed in a riverboat accident. Where the story about him coming out west and working the gold fields came from, nobody has any clue. But we have documentation that shows otherwise. We have documentation that shows no, they never came out here. No, he never died of cholera in the gold fields around Sacramento. He was killed in a riverboat accident, his wife along with him. So, you know, using AI to tell that story to set a record straight, I think is a good thing, basically, because I think it ends that false side of the folklore. And that false side of the folklore is in print. It's in books that are out there.
No, but it doesn't end it.
And it's just wrong.
It doesn't end it because,
Well, you're right. It doesn't end it because somebody is always going to say, no, that's not what happened.
right,
But I mean, when I have documents and can show those documents,
that's not good
I
enough
mean,
to some people.
yeah, I mean, well, some people are never going to be satisfied. And the only opinion that matters to them is theirs. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
but it's an important point to point out that even if something has been cleared up
Mm-hmm.
due to documentation,
Oh, yeah.
um, that does not in that does not in itself, that's a wrap. But it does
Yeah.
not account. But it does not account for people's ability to not want to
Believe
take
it.
a
Yeah.
good look at some. It doesn't account for the variations of human beings and how they
Mm-hmm.
interact with information around
Oh, yeah.
around them.
Well, that's why we have so many myths floating around that have been shot down. They have been disproven, but they still persist to this day because a certain percentage of people just refuse to believe the evidence. you know. So
Yeah, I mean it's an impossible thing to expect humanity. The people that propagate half truths, myths, or flat out know something is not right, but they propagate it because of their preference or all these things. There's going to always, or it seems like, because there always have been, sufficient people to do such things that will muddy the waters so that when someone embarks, so for instance, me embarking on the journey of
mhm.
researching, especially the my ancestors, but from my ancestors, due to the fact that I had to go back in time, you start to see, well, what was the area like? What was the
Yeah.
political ramifications like?
Mhm.
Well, wait a second, what was this and that? So once you start asking questions, it becomes more involved because now you have events that start popping up, and then you start seeing inconsistencies with events of history, and then you start, so it's sort of like tumbling down. And that's because throughout history, people in select positions across time were either lazy about it, biased about it, or a combination of both, or intending to, or not focused on it. Like a very benign yet important point: the further back in time you go, the less. So one of the most important things for documentation was the Catholic Church. They would write everything, and therefore we could go back to the 1500s, maybe even further. But personally, it depends on how far you can go back because they wrote everything down. But here's the thing: the further back you go, what they wrote down was even less.
Yeah.
So they might say in a baptism, whereas today they'll say um, Lindsay, Mark,
Mhm.
who lives in such and such, father, mother, grandfather, maternal grandmother, and they lay that out. And in here and this, and they lay that whole thing out, and then you can run across that and say, "Damn, I've got like a lot of info." Well, back in 300-400 years ago, instead of doing that, which they started doing, coming this way more, hundreds of years this way. Back then, they'd say, they might give your name, Mark Lindsay, but then they'll
Mhm.
say, and
Yeah.
mother Anna. They'll say, and John Wilkes,
Mhm.
da da da,
Or
and Anna.
Fred and Ethel's son,
Yeah, and but here's the thing.
but the son is never named.
But here's the thing. Back then,
Mhm.
in their locale, that was more than enough.
Yeah.
Everybody was gonna know. Oh yeah, that's Fred and Anna.
Yeah.
Excuse
Exactly.
me. But hundreds years forward, who the heck knows?
Yeah.
And so things like that are normal because of the situation. But then there's actors in history that are consciously, due to preference or biased,
Mhm.
um, turning the steering on that ship so that it goes in the direction that they prefer. um, so for me, it's been an eye opener
Yeah.
on many fronts, especially concerning U.S. history. It
Mhm.
doesn't detract from the overarching uh, uh, sentiment, original sentiment, but what it does is gives me a broader scope, and I see the intricacies of history in a little bit of a better way. All these things influence. So
Yeah.
if you take a
And
computer program and say, I want you to tell it how it is, and it has the ability, like AI, to lay it out, um,
oh,
maybe it'll clean the decks of issues, and it'll just lay it out in front of you. But let's say you
maybe,
want, go ahead.
maybe, but maybe not. I mean, Steve has a. Let's see what you think about this. Since AI is based on LLMS, which are collections of things humans say or believe, AI will always be fallible since it can't tell truth from lies on its own. What do you
Okay,
think of that?
I think that that if the question is infallibility, of course, fallibility concerning truth, there's always more to know. But if you tell the AI, for instance, yeah, if it, so here, Steve is doing the same thing roughly that you were doing before, roughly, with like, well, what if I want to read? What if I want to fill in the blanks and use my imagination? Well, you can prompt the AI to exclude that which, so just like that,
Mhm.
With what Steve was saying, you could, in theory, prompt the AI to only use, and this is going to be as good as it gets. So at the end of the day, if fallibility, if at the end of the day, if ultimately clear shot truth is the goal, it's going to rely on the information that it comes in. So that's true.
Well,
But what, no, hold on, let me just say, but if you tell it to only draw from source material,
I was going to
primary
go there.
source, you can even tweak it to just give me the primary. It'll write out or play out or whatever the heck it'll do, just that information. But if you think that secondary is quite important, whatever level of sources you want to use, so it could do that, um, and
But
exclude all the other stuff.
I was getting ready to say it can also compare. It would know that there was never a face to face meeting between George Washington and Abraham Lincoln because they lived in different eras. Now, you could tell it in a fictional world what would a meeting between those two people look like.
Right, right.
And it could take information that it knows from those two people and come up with a scenario. But you would have to tell it that we're looking for a fictional meeting because AI would have to know just by the simple fact of the time periods that these two people lived in that they could not have factually had a face to face meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it could tell. I think AI could tell truth from lies on its own to a point, but we have a case of garbage in, garbage out. Because if the overwhelming majority of the evidence points to those two people did live during the same time, whether that's true or not, it's going to believe that that's true.
No, not if you do what I said. If you go
And
for source material,
that's what I'm getting at. And that's what I'm getting at. If you would have to tell it to create a fictional
yeah,
portrayal.
yeah, you would have to prompt it to do
Yeah.
whatever it is that you want, and then you can refine it and stuff.
Mhm.
The point is that our judgment
Mhm.
is dependent on the available information that we have collected.
Mhm.
You do not have the amount of information that the internet has.
Right. Nobody does.
And this computer program AI, although it's not conscious,
Mhm.
can disseminate and can look through and can do all that stuff that would take you 10 years to do on one particular subject. It can do it in whatever time a computer quickly can do it, and then it can put it on a plate in front of you. Um, and you can even ask it to name the sources so that as you read
Yeah.
it, you can, I mean, just a bunch of, Mark, forgive me for doing this again. Give me 1 second.
Oh, I don't know. Go ahead. Go ahead. Get her done. Oh man. Sucks when you got an animal that's sick. Let's see here. But that does bring about a an interesting point, Steve. It can't tell truth from lies on its own. I would imagine that's true to a certain extent, but it should be able to compare. And if the information on, let's say, my scenario, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, the lifetimes of those two people and the lifetimes of those two people would not have intersected. It would have to know that they could never have done a face to face meeting. And I get what you're saying. But then using that thought process, Mark's relative did die of cholera in the goldfields since it's in published works. That is true, but it would have to also reconcile that with the census records that put them in that put that brother in Indiana during the 1840s and then in Missouri in the 1850s and other records that are on published websites as well. So there's what I'm getting at is there are published references to both. It would have to be able to decide which is which, you know. Can it fact check to see if the greater amount of info is correct or BS? That's that I would assume that's remains to be seen.
Well,
And
was it?
that's where I was going. Can an AI fact check to see if the greater amount of info is correct or BS?
Yeah, you
I
could do
don't
any.
know.
Yeah, you could do so. You can do any combination. So you can do any combination of. So okay, anything you could do,
Hmm.
anything you could do, I could do better. That
I
the
could do
computer can
anything.
do better in terms of the available information out there that's available to you and I.
Hmm.
Except, in order for you to sift through the information, it would take you an eternity. Right now, you know you could not go through all the catalogs of every musician in order to find all the words that use he as an example. The computer could do that um, as an example. So what
Hmm.
I'm saying is that even though you have the ability and discernment, and you have this thing where, like Steve was questioning, can it see truth from lies, all that stuff. Um, Instead of thinking it, oh well, that's a lie and this is truth. No, you could use already available information that you would use anyways, primary source material, and then as an ultimate filter, you're reading what AI offered you. So you yourself in that packet can then determine whether or not you think that that's accurate or not. So at the end of the
That,
day,
that's true. Steve also puts forth that it can fact check to a point, but it's only based on what it has access to.
yeah, like you and I,
You know,
like you
well,
and I.
but it can also go with yeah. It can just do the collating faster. That's all it can do. Is just do it faster.
And if you think about it, let's say, because there's the by the way, I'm not necessarily pro AI or negative AI. Like I have no idea what the
Right.
consequences of it is.
Well, I'm
I'm
both,
just,
but go ahead.
yeah, I'm just like but I'm putting forth what the some of the things that are possible. So if concerning a video clip, you could, Steve could gather his camera, go out, like let's say he wants to film a scene about um, somewhere in Mississippi, and he wants to direct it, and he wants a video that tells a story about a corner somewhere in Mississippi or whatever. He could actually, instead of using AI, do all that like we've always done, sit and do the information, do the this and that, get the lighting and get all the things, and write the script and this and that, and look through the archives out in the library, and then if not, go to the city office and whatnot and all that stuff. And when it's said and done, whatever time it took Steve to do all that, he would have that product that he can offer people to see. The AI will collate this and that and can invent, you know, or it could take from current stills or stills from the past of that area. It could dig through all the archives that are available.
Hmm.
So at the end of the day, it's that sort of it's doing that legwork for you in that term. So in those terms. So if you don't once the computer gives you that video,
Hmm.
you could watch it, and if you don't like it, you can actually read and tell it, no, I want this changed in it, and it'll do the thing to change that. So that's the direction it seems that it's going in.
Yeah,
It could do
and
that already, but it seems to the point where, yeah, it's pretty. It's a head scratcher.
it is. It is because we. Do you think we're moving toward a time where people are not going to believe if they didn't see it themselves?
That's already the case to some degree. I don't believe if you so like um you sent me the a video.
Hmm.
You sent me two videos. The one earlier from a few weeks ago, we won't touch
Hmm.
on it because it's too long, extensive. But you sent me a recent one because we've talked about um, the um, the satellite or
International Space Station.
the
Yeah.
International Space Station. Well, we had talked before about. Well, you sent me a documentary where a guy sits with a camera, and because he was challenged by someone, and he produced a video where in the scope the International Space Station goes through, and he gets the pixels that you see because it's so tiny, and he uses various frames to overlay to create the best resulting image. Those are tried and true methods of getting an image to pop the image out that would
Mhm.
have otherwise been a such a pixelated thing and this and that.
Mhm.
So he went through the process of using all the tools available to him to prove or to evidence
Mhm.
that. But I said just earlier, I don't believe anything I see. Well, here's the thing: when I saw that video, my original argument with you was not that there's no space station; it was that you can't see it with the naked eye, um, and so in this video, he's not addressing necessarily that. But we talked about that one time.
Yeah.
But you told me that you saw this and that you referenced it as the station. And my argument was actually, do we get to a time when nobody believes anything unless they see it with their own eyes? Even if you see something with your own eyes, you can't and not talking about the video because he used the timing of when the satellite would pass by
Yeah.
and all that. So he used a lot of things to enrich his point so that you can't deny it. You could deny it, but it's very difficult to do so.
Mhm.
However, with that said, how much you could be a contrarian on anything, like
Sure, you can. Yeah.
but but if you don't, in effect, if you don't see it, you could always say, I can always find anybody can find wiggle room, but if it leans in a direction, you have to say, well, damn, it's leaning in this direction and stuff. And I mean, so you could be hard on something
If you're honest, yes.
if you're well no, being hard is also honest in terms of, so for instance, um, this is a bad reference, but since I brought it up, what the hell? It could be any other thing that might be better suited, but we saw something go through the sky.
Mhm.
Um, or I'm sorry, forget the video for half a second. You saw something go through the sky.
Mhm.
But I could easily say, and justifiably so, you said it's a space station. I could simply say, you saw something in the sky. I grant you saw something in the sky, but that bit that you extra attached to it, which is, and it's the space station, that's an attachment to that you saw something in the sky that if one probes, well, why did you see, or why do you think it's the space station? Well, it's the only thing that yeah, but how do you know, and how big was it? And you can get into this thing. It's not just that you saw the space station in the sky. If you had to prove that, you're actually sharing an anecdote. And if I was a hard ass, I could say, well, not even a hard. If I was unfair or unjust, I would say you didn't see anything in the sky. Like you could play that game, but that is an incorrect thing to say because if
And
you
not only that, it would exactly be a game.
unless it depends on the circumstance. But I'm not. Let me go to where I'm going. It would depend on the circumstance.
All
It
right,
depends.
then go ahead and get there because I'm going to go where I'm going to go with it. But go ahead.
Okay, so something that you see in the sky, the extra attached information needs to be offered if the person is being a hard ass. Now, the person can say, no, you didn't see anything. Now, that falls under the category of not having honor to receive honorably what a person is telling you.
That's what I was talking about, being honest.
But that right. And so if somebody says, hey man, I fell and hit my knee, because it could be anything. It doesn't have to be the satellite thing. It could be
Mhm.
anything. I'm talking about the principle of will it get to a point where we don't believe anything unless we see it, which you had mentioned. So I'm focused on that, and I'm just using this as an example. It doesn't matter either way what I use, but since the satellite thing, um, if you say I fell and hit my knee because there's a bump on the curve and whatnot and this and that, or whatever the case, I could be unhonorable and deny you accepting that fact that you fell, but I could accept it but say, well, you said it's because of the bump on the thing, but have you looked at your shoes? And you understand what I'm saying? Maybe your shoe
I
was,
do.
and
And
so you could extract that from anything else. So yes, you can argue the what and what, when, where, and how, and this and that to a point. if the information is not there. Go ahead. Go ahead.
But the information is there because there's one salient point that he made in that video talking about the International Space Station. And I made a similar point to you when we were talking about it. And that point was it was 100% predictable and it was 100% accurate. That there are trackers that you can go online and find that track the position of the space station. And those trackers, and there's more than one, believe me, there's a bunch of them out there. Those trackers will show you on a map where the space station is right now, somewhere over the earth. And you can use other trackers to predict where it's going to go and what it's going to be. And as he pointed out in that video, when he shot those still pictures of the space station going in front of the moon so he could get a background, just being out there in the darkness of space wasn't good enough for him. He wanted to get it going across the face of the moon. Those trackers were able to predict 2 weeks out a 1.5 second time span that would be visible to him at night. And he had to be at the mercy of the weather and hope like hell it was clear enough for him to get it. And it took a few months for that to happen because on several occasions, either he couldn't be there or the weather was trash or something like that. But the fact that it was predictable 2 weeks out, and according to him, to the second, when they said it was going to go across the face of the moon, it did.
No, you don't know that.
I'm going by what he said. I'm taking him at face value.
There we go.
No. See, now you're doing the dishonorable thing.
No,
by trying to wiggle out of it.
No, don't do that.
Yeah,
don't you do that because you're missing. Don't do that. I'm
my
arguing
point,
a principle.
Stop. Let me finish. The point was this is predictable. He was able to take the information he got 2 weeks beforehand, go out and set it up and get the shot. Okay. I did the same thing. I did the same thing when I told you about the International Space Station. I used 2 separate trackers to compare and contrast times when it was supposed to show up on the horizon, in what direction, approximately how high up, and how long it would be visible from our location. And it was predictable and repeatable because it went every hour and 40 minutes. And the duration would get longer or shorter depending upon where in above the horizon it was passing. So it's predictable and it was accurate.
How does any of that
mm-hmm.
any of it have anything to do, any of that, with the point that I'm trying to make? And secondly, the point I'm trying to make, you quickly said, now I'm being dishonorable.
Because you flat out said, oh no. Even with the evidence, you said, no, you don't know that. Well, yes, I have to take the evidence as presented.
I'm trying to explain the principle of what you said already. See, here's the thing. I said it could be anything. The principle here is what you said in the beginning. Are we getting to a point
mm-hmm.
where we won't believe something unless we see it with our own eyes? And I said,
that's the point that I was trying to make. I used those trackers myself, went out and I saw it with my own eyes.
I'm not calling you.
No, I know you're not, but that's my point.
You said now I'm being dishonest. You don't even know the point that I'm trying to make.
I only said you're being dishonest when you said, no, you don't know that. And I'm saying, yes, I do know that because I used those trackers myself and did it myself.
Okay, let me defend it very easily. Okay. Like this.
Okay.
Just so you understand. I don't think that you know the gentleman that produced the video. I'm not okay. So let me.
No, I don't.
Let me. One. Two, you don't know if he's being honest or dishonest. You don't know if he actually did film it or
Mm-hmm.
he created it in order
Mm-hmm.
to do what he does
Mm-hmm.
in some dishonest. You don't know none of it.
No,
Your
you're right.
question of what you may have done back when you did it,
Mm-hmm.
you have personal knowledge of,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't know what this guy did. You don't know if he's being dishonest. You are taking him at face value. And so
Yeah,
my point
I
is,
said that.
at, right, so you don't know. Your question originally, see, here's the thing, you called me dishonest. Now I'm being dishonest. That was the
Well,
wrong thing for you to
I
say.
meant dishonest in the fact that you're being contrarian. You're trying to wiggle out
No,
of
you
a
asked a
fact
question.
that he presented.
It could be anything, Mark.
I know it could be anything.
So forget that if
Well,
a
that's the
person,
no, we can't forget it because that's the example used in the video.
yeah, but
We can't forget it.
okay, look, it could be anything in terms of
You're right.
the principle that I'm talking about
Okay.
is the question you asked. I should have, in hindsight, I know it was going to get sticky. I should have not brought up this particular subject because you are passionate about it. But
Hmm.
it's perfectly reasonable to use if you detach yourself personally from this whether something is true or not in terms of your personal. Forget that. The principle is: are we getting to a point
Hmm.
where we can't believe anything unless we can physically handle
Unless
this
we see
stuff?
it. Yes.
And my point is, I should have used some other thing,
Mhm.
but because my point, and we had two subjects going on. I
Right.
tried to explain it as clear as possible. It's when it gets complicated, it gets complicated. My point is that you don't know. So, for instance, I explained to you that, oh, I don't know. We'll use me as an example. Mark, my great granduncle found a chest,
Hmm.
and from some of the gold pieces, they made jewelry, and the family
Right.
kept it. One lady sold it, and because she needed it, because she lived in Cuba and this and that.
Right.
My grandmother took it. All that. I explained this to you,
Yeah.
and then from your vantage point, you have no personal knowledge, so you have to take me at face value
You're right.
honorably,
Right. And I have
right?
no reason to doubt you.
Right. Okay. So now we're using a scenario that's in my timeline, and
Okay.
so now you could be, and I mentioned it, you could be hard up, which would be the dishonorable thing to do, and
Hmm.
deny me that, and say no. And I even used tripping on the side curve. You could say I tripped on the side curve, and it was because there's a bump, and I could say to you, well, no, show me the bump. You could go in that direction. So I
Yeah, I
use all
could
these different
say,
scenarios.
right. I could try to use wiggle room and say, well, did you see the chest? How do you know that it ever happened? You don't know that that happened.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So at some point, if you're arguing, what do we get? Are we getting to the point where we don't believe anything unless we see it? Um, you you only truly know what you can see, touch, feel, and whatnot. Everything else is taken in honor at face value.
Right.
Is my point. And I said no, we've been there already. So to
Right.
a huge swath of people, and depending on the gravity of what's the question at hand, they would go either hard up or believe in something. So the guy in the video, um there's no reason for you to doubt him, but then
Mhm.
again, that's him doing whatever he's doing. There's
Right.
people that lie flat out depending
Sure,
on
there
the
are.
level of thing. I'm not suggesting he is lying. I'm not
Okay.
suggesting that the satellite isn't up there. I'm not suggesting that
I
you
know
were
that.
lying. I'm not suggesting that.
I know
What I'm
that.
suggesting is the principle of it is: do you really know that this guy's telling the truth?
Well, if you take that level of skepticism, you have to apply it, therefore, to everything. If you're going to be intellectually honest, you have to question everything you've ever read because you don't know if you weren't there.
Yeah, unless you're there. Well, this goes
And
to
so and so that's why I introduced the aspect of predictability if you can replicate those results predictably, you have to accept that it happened. And it doesn't matter what it is. If your neighbor tells you he stuck his finger in a light socket and got a shock, and you can predictably go to your light socket, stick your finger in, and get the same result, you have to take him at face value that what he said was true because it's predictable and you did it yourself.
Yeah,
That's all. That's the only point that I was making.
if well, no,
Okay.
you made a bunch of other points,
Well,
and you
true,
brought up
but
that
that was the
dishonest
main
thing,
point. The
and you
main
brought up
point. Well, no, what I was getting at about the dishonest thing was, wait, you're standing back and saying, how do you know that he was telling the truth? It appeared that you were trying to wiggle out of the conversation and say, okay,
no,
that was the appearance. Okay.
because I'm trying to explain, and I use very different things.
Right.
Look, the light socket scenario. It's the principle of the matter.
Mm-hmm.
You asked, are we getting to the point that we're going to have to see it in order to believe it? And
but I wasn't going this deep on a philosophical level. If you see an airplane take off from LA International Airport, video footage of it, okay? Are you or I in a position to say that didn't happen because we
yes,
weren't there to see it?
it depends.
I don't think we really are,
Yes.
because we're not in a position to deny it either.
No, but you don't. Okay. The main topic is AI and the things it can do.
Right.
So under that umbrella. So look,
and that's what I was getting at, because
no,
you can now get on. Well, wait a minute, because you can get on an AI and you can tell it to create a fictional aircraft from a fictional airline and take off from LA International Airport. So have we gotten to that point to where we're going to have to question every piece of video footage we see?
That's what I'm trying to address, but okay. What I shouldn't have done, now thinking back, because look, it takes a level of stepping back, because here's the thing. So, and that's why I went with the wooden the chess thing, to revert it to me, but I also used other examples. The principle here is, in order to believe something rock solid without any doubt, or the ability for someone to inject doubt, one would have to be at the level of physically in front of them.
Yeah.
Across the board. Because if you're honest with the concept, that would be the ultimate level of, so you can see the sun or the light socket. You can see, so look, most people will believe what they see on the news.
Yeah.
Do I know that even that sentence is true? I feel like it's true that most people, but do I know most people to even think that? Or am I filling in the blank? So even though I could say something outlandish like that, because it is outlandish, people go and say, you know what? Most people are dumb, but I'm smart, as an example.
Well,
or most people are, but it's the concept. It's not the story I'm telling right now. It's the concept underlying that you have some knowledge that you can't produce quantifiably, and yet you're quite confident in it. That applies for everything. Yes, we fill in the blanks or suspend disbelief on the things that we don't have physical contact with, believe it, and that's due to our preference and our confidence level. Man, yeah, I believe this, and there's all this information, but like, let's say you don't have the first-hand knowledge. Now, is that too rigid? Yeah, we have to accept belief in some things. So if the guy, let me just say, if the guy, and I'm not denying the video.
I know you're not.
I'm making another point using the video, and unfortunately, so if the guy shows the video and this is and produces the camera shot across the moon, I saw the video. I mean, that's why I brought it up. And he's showing that the guy's question was false. Here we have this, and that. Now we have that. I think that's that's sufficient in my opinion.
Mhm.
But somebody could say, we don't know when you took that shot. You're saying you did. We don't know. We weren't there. You don't have witnesses. This is you on your own. Like, you could do that. Now you could think that, oh well, you're being picky. He did all that work, and so no, no, you're accepting the fill in the blanks of you weren't there and this and that because you trust the guy. It's a
Mhm.
matter of your preference and trust. So if so, even that video that you showed, if not, to me, I I fall under the category that you do, in that, well, they showed sufficient there. But if
Mhm.
one wanted to take that leap, they could say, when did you take that? Prove that you took it at that time. What were the, you could go, so in reality you weren't there to see it. So what I'm
Well,
saying is, in the concept of AI, they could reproduce so much stuff.
and
Yeah.
that's where I was going with this. Okay, so if we are getting to the point to where we can't believe anything we see, if we weren't physically there, what does that do to all the surveillance cameras? Have we gotten to the point to where we can't trust surveillance footage because it's used constantly in court? All right, they've got images of these three guys that came in and robbed a bank. Is it gotten to the point to where video or photographs are no longer admissible evidence in court? Because if you can create a 30-second clip of somebody completely different going into that bank, they can't prosecute you. Or
unless
if you,
unless they accept that the video footage is a good standard, and the argument from the lawyer that's defending the client didn't make good enough of an
well,
objection with experts and such.
that's what I'm getting at. Are we reaching the point to where even that kind of footage is
Maybe,
not
yeah.
trustworthy? Are
Yeah.
we getting to the point to where that's not going to be admissible? It's not going to be good enough. Because I mean, if you talk to law enforcement and court officers and district attorneys and everything else, they will flat out tell you that eyewitnesses are some of the least reliable people. I mean,
If you have a guy on film, so remember, we've talked about this before.
mhm,
There's something called the preponderance of evidence and such.
right.
So if you have one piece of evidence, but then if you have multiple pieces of evidence, that's so in a court,
Mhm,
if they present that video that you're saying, and is it me, really, no, it's not me, they framed it and stuff, but then you have fingerprints, and then you have eyewitnesses,
right.
and then you have this, if you start having, and so that's how they guide it. So
Right. Understood. Understood.
that's the saving grace.
But I was just talking about the footage itself. Okay,
No, you can't
let wait a
trust
minute,
what.
wait a minute. Let's take let's take the forensic out of it. So we don't have fingerprints. The guy was wearing gloves. We don't, you know, for by some freak of nature, no hair fell out of him, or he didn't throw a cigarette down on the way inside the supermarket, or whatever it was. All we have is the video footage. Is that enough to incriminate on? Are we getting to that point to where we have to start doubting that?
Yeah, we don't. Okay, so another thing, um, with that idea, and
Mhm,
it goes to the same principle. It's
mhm,
the same principle. I'm not talking about my particular preference.
mhm.
I'll say two things. One, what I'm about to say, but before that, me, like you or anybody else, we're on the same ship with all these things.
Right.
Um, we make a judgment call on what we're seeing or the information we're receiving, on
Mhm,
how accurate, how disposable or not it may be. What's
mhm.
important or a red flag for you may not be for me, but just because it's not for me, but it is for you, or vice versa, just because a piece of information may be political, damaging to the country, let's say, or whatever the case, anything, it's the principle that matters here. Just because it's true for you and I say it's not, on the flip side of things, or not important to me, or nah, that's not that,
Yeah.
doesn't remove the fact that it might be not only critical in your eyes and vital in your eyes, but should be for me, but I'm not seeing it. I'm not picking it up.
Yeah.
Even when you point it out at me, I'm like, oh, I don't see it. Humans are very complicated in such
Sure.
things.
Sure
So
they
we
are.
have all these things. So um
But
so we have this,
you said something very important in there. You said accuracy. What if that accuracy is called into question? That's what I'm getting at.
and that's what I've talked about too. Is it accurate to say that something is true when we don't have information beyond the reasonable doubt? And so look, we all watch videos under the presumption, roughly, especially when it's news, in a general sense, that we're being, check this out, that we're being reported information that's vital to the country and our local area and this and that.
Yeah.
On one level, we're accepting that in
Mm-hmm.
general. Some people may,
Yeah.
but let's say, in a general sense, we're saying this is a newscaster. She's telling us X, Y, and Z, and we're receiving the information. We may not like
Mm-hmm.
the particulars. Maybe some things seem a little, but in general, she's
Yeah.
feeding us. So we accept it. But we don't judge, and we're not aware of if she's flat out lying. If the whole freaking programming is a video, it looks real to me. We don't know that though. We don't
Yeah.
reach out and touch her. No, like that might sound like an exaggerated thing, and it
Well,
would have 20
yeah.
years ago.
And it depends on the context. I mean, if they're telling you a hurricane is coming and you step out your door and you see the neighbor's house flying by, you can kind of believe them. But, but then again, you can't determine the accuracy of a shootout 20 miles away because you're not there to see it.
We take things at face value.
We
That is
have
an accurate truth.
we kind of have to because we're choiceless because we can't be everywhere.
Right. So if something's very detailed,
Mm-hmm.
so look, that's why I brought the honor thing,
Mm-hmm.
which I wasn't happy with your use of it, but I understand you were. Let's just leave that. But
Mm-hmm.
if you take the honor thing, if it's someone that you're talking with that's a friend, family member, and so on, in general, a normal human being would not deny them the
Mm-hmm.
basic facts and premises. You may expand on it. Well, what if this is this and that in that? But when it's coming from unknown areas that are not close to you, and even so, even if it's close knit, um, depending on the scenario, there could be falsification, rumors,
Well,
lies.
sure. That's where
Um,
we get into the family folklore thing that come from very close knit
that
people.
goes back to the family folklore. But then there's the malicious intent part, and this and this and that.
Yeah.
With video or anything that we receive, I have to suspend my disbelief in a truckload of stuff, um, because I have to get on with it and watch. So I'm in
Mm-hmm.
agreement in a general sense and stuff, and therefore, just in case that it
Mm-hmm.
was, I was in agreement with the video that I saw where he disproved the guy's
Right.
question. But but again, that I wasn't fighting that argument. I was fighting
Right.
a secondary argument, which was the disbelief thing. So are we getting to that point? Yes. Have we been in that point to a degree? Yes. What
Mm-hmm.
if they falsify world leaders saying things like they've talked about that on the news
Oh yeah.
with this brand new AI? What if they falsify what a person says? Could they do that to one politician in order to sink another one, and so forth? And
Yeah. And they
the,
already have to a certain degree without using AI. Selective editing has done a lot of damage as well.
that's a mechanical
Right.
reference of what AI could do. So they can already do like a wag the dog thing. So look, on principle, yes, we are at the mercy of the information that comes down to us, and yes, um, are we getting to the point where, yeah, if you're rigorous, this is where conspiracy theory people come in.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad word in my esteem, but at the same time, the problem is this: some people accept the reality offered to them, which is perfectly fine. You can live your life with the reality offered. There's a certain reality. There's
Uh,
newscasts, there's newspapers, and these things inform the populace at large. And even if you had, let's say, I'll give an example. a few weeks ago there were aliens spotted somewhere in Texas in somebody's yard. The police came out. They confirmed that it was true. There was aliens, and there was aliens, and there was aliens. I never saw an alien, and they filmed it,
Mm-hmm.
but they blocked it out when they went in the yard. The alien was sitting in a yard in someone's house in Texas, and so on and so forth. The newscasters, the media went with it. They said that yes, this is true. This is true. This is true. A lot of people believing in stuff. I don't believe in aliens. I believe we're the only ones here,
Okay.
flat out. I believe we were created by a creator. I believe that. But
Okay.
it's different from me saying I believe that. I know you know this, but I'm just
Mm-hmm.
saying, like in the general discussion, it's different saying I believe something and then you coming to me and saying, well, can you prove that? Can you show me that? And I couldn't do it because it's something that I believe. I understand it as
Right.
within the world. But now that's different than the newscasters pushing that.
Mm-hmm.
There's no video evidence. Why should I believe them? They're supposed to tell the truth.
Right. The
I didn't,
onus of proof is on them, not you.
right now, if they're telling me to believe in a creator and this, and that, well, that's not their job. But essentially, what they're trying to do, so it's okay for you to believe in,
Mm-hmm.
literally, like you can believe a bunch of stuff as long as it
Sure.
doesn't interfere. I mean, this I'm talking about in the American world. I can believe a bunch of stuff religiously, this, and that. But the difference is then me pushing it. Like if I were a newscaster, I would not be a newscaster. What I would be is George Norrie
Mm-hmm.
on talk radio um, as a mystery guy.
Presenting it as fact.
Right. So the news reported this. A lot of people believe it. Maybe other people don't. I'm one of the ones that don't. Although maybe something happened there, but I don't have the proof of that.
No, but the onus of proof again is not on you. It's not on you to disprove their claim. It's on them to prove their claim. You don't have to disprove anything. You know, if they want to be believed and seen as a credible news source, they'll present their evidence. If they have none, they need to question, should we be covering this? When there are
See,
so many other things that we can present evidence on that should be covered.
that's the problem. So if you ask me, I mean, my principle is the same. I'm a human being, so I know. I mean, I'm a human being, so what happens is that I was born into a world where there were things such as the news and many people believing what was coming, and there's no reason not to. But maybe some things they get wrong, maybe some things are. So I grew up in a world understanding these things,
Yeah.
but there's these sources that come at you. But I also understand that even though we're reading it and it's the consensus idea, a news story or whatever, um, there might be other stuff. Now I don't know there is, but there might be other stuff there that might ruin that story,
Mm-hmm.
the truth or validity of that story.
Right.
And I put that in a box that's okay. This is official, but there's but I'm not going to jump off a bridge for it.
Yeah.
As an example. So are we getting to the point of a lot of people believe in the reality built around them when it comes to the news and such and this and that, and I believe to a certain point too. But if it's too outrageous, like for instance, we talk about lizard people, we talk
Mm-hmm.
about this and that. Yes, I enjoy that, but I don't have lizard people posters, nor do I think that we're invaded by lizard people. I don't think that.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the questions and mysteries around it because I like that. But it's a far distance from that
Mm-hmm.
to saying, no, this is true, and then providing evidence for it, which I couldn't. If I believed in lizard people like these people believe, where's the proof? There's none. So I understand that,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
So now they can take an AI and use that to create quote unquote proof.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we're in a situation
Right.
where,
So we already have a huge distrust of the media We keep partaking, but we have a huge distrust of the media. Is AI going to increase that distrust, or is it going to reduce that distrust? I'm not saying any news organization has used AI to falsify any images or any video to create a story to match a narrative. I'm not saying that at all. But how many steps away from that do you think we really are right now?
Oh
And
yeah,
what's to stop someone from trying it?
no, it's problematic.
Big time problematic,
It's problematic, and
because it doesn't even have to be the truth. All there has to be is the accusation, because a certain percentage of the population will believe that accusation.
then there's another issue, which is what
Mhm.
you've brought up in the past, which is valid. I think it's valid, but all in its right place.
Mhm.
According to the point, the base point. Um, so if something is put out on the news, like let's say some crazy thing, I don't know. Let's talk about. Remember when we were talking about something to do with you're at home and you discover something. What was it? Oh, so the flat Earth. So the problem with using these examples
Mhm.
is that people automatic. So like let's say you say, here's a problem with conversation is that if you bring, and not just you and I, just
Mhm.
everybody, because we're human.
Yeah.
Um, if you say something, if you pull a word out of thin air, depending on it brings up imagery in people, and all of a sudden people to round the bases will attach all sorts of things to that preliminary word you used with a bunch of assumptions. They create their own dialogue and conclusions before you even unpack the concept, because that word is a sparky word,
Mhm.
or concept and so on. So all of a
Well,
sudden,
I just did it with accuracy. Yeah.
well, we all do it, but
Mhm.
that's the problem with human beings. So if I bring up flat Earth,
Mhm.
like if you're in a random thing and you walk up to a stranger and say, sir, excuse me, um, flat Earth, and you don't say anything else, but just that word has already created in that human being to a degree or another all sorts of, without you explaining or anything like that. He's already, whatever he's assumed in the past and wanted, he's already created that, and then he's looking at you. He already sees a tin foil.
Yeah.
When maybe you would have said the Earth is flat out in the parking lot, and the dunes on both sides that have been that they're filling in the rest of it with are going to be used as more, like let's say as an example, um, the context matters. But keywords create narratives without the narrative even being explained yet. And so because of that problem, why humans can never get it unless unless a whole report is written, communication is almost primed to miss to miss between people. Um,
Well, not only that, but you also have manipulation involved. And there have been study after study after study after study that can show this. I mean, one quick random one. It was a fictitious company. A study was done to see how receptive people were to manipulation. They set up a little stand out in front of a supermarket and they asked 100 people if they would be willing to try, just taste test this new energy drink. And about 15% of the people said, yeah, sure, I'll give it a try. Most people didn't have time or didn't want to do it. And their reasons for not wanting to do it were various, you know. But all these interactions took place over just a few seconds. Then another day they went, set up the exact same thing. And as a person came by the table, they would ask them, excuse me, are you the adventurous type? And that was the question they asked. Are you the adventurous type? And the people who said no didn't want to take part in this survey, didn't want to try it. The people who said yes overwhelmingly took part in it. Now, it was roughly 15% of the people on the first day when they just asked them to try this new energy drink. On the next day, when they asked them first, are you the adventurous type? 68% did. They tried the energy drink just by asking that one question. So that's a manipulation of the mind to get a different result. So, just as what you're talking about, if you immediately walk up and say flat earth, guy's eyes are probably going to roll so hard he's looking at his own brain. But if you start talking about something else and then work that way into it, you may have a completely different reception.
Yeah. Um. So two things, but the one, because one thing brought me to the, for some reason, to the original. Remember I mentioned they had two, one thing and the other, which was this. You said, because I now remember it. We were talking about flat Earth that one time, and I said, well, wouldn't that be life changing? And you said, well, um, I'd have to still go to the bank and still have to do
Yeah,
the groceries and stuff. Well, regardless of the circumstance, I still there's certain things that I still have
it
to
really
prepare.
wouldn't affect my life. Yeah,
Yeah, and the reason being is that there's, I mean, I reason out from you saying is that there's still things in order to keep my motor running, foods, it's supplement for the body,
sure.
just any number of things that you're still going to have to function in, regardless of what
Mm-hmm.
new novelty occur. Okay, so in all this with trust and distrust and this and that, and
Mm-hmm.
AI taking a foothold, and can we trust what we see with our eyes and this and that? Which I think that one would, depending on the person, one would do better to be slightly more critical. But
I
it
agree
depends.
with you. I agree with you there.
It depends on what it is. Like if football, a baseball league today on Sunday, they lost 15 to 10, like stuff like that. Yeah, you don't have the first person knowledge because you're not at the baseball game. But it's, but now if they say something like aliens abducted my stepchild and we're living in Phoenix and a whole thing, you look at that, and some people want to believe that, so they do, without questioning all the details involved, because just they do. But going to what you said about I still have to live my life.
Mm-hmm.
If what we're being fed, and if the news, and if the politicians, and if the images of one politician or the other, or if a murder or a bank robbery, at the end of the day, is the government lying to us? At the end of the day, what you said holds true within that concept. Um, so all this information, whether it's true or not, we public Joe Schmo um, can't reach out to the president as an example and say, "Sir, no, because Iraq and this and that and this." We don't have that access. At best, we're locally driving around our Walmart parking lot. We don't have access to the rocket ships. This we don't have. We're not sitting in NASA. The elephants, the great elephants, and no, we're not in Africa. We're not. It's none of what we are is like, let's say, Eloy in this particular area of Sweetwater, with access to outward information, but we worry, or we think we don't have that, like what you said. It holds true. We still have to do our thing. All these extra things we just have access to, whether they're true or not, we wouldn't know one way or the other. And therefore, at the end of the day, who knows what the hell's going on? Because we really don't know what the hell's going on. We only know what's presented to us.
Right.
I'm not calling it lie or not lie, maybe some lies,
Well,
but we don't know.
if you're the inquisitive type at all, or if you are the cynical type at all, you will always check more than one source. You'll always check more than one
If
source.
it's important to you.
If it's, I was getting ready to say, if you don't care, there's nothing anybody can say or do that's going to make you care.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Hmm. Yeah. So the question is that yes, we don't know. We think we know, and it's not a comfortable.
Well,
So really, Mark, I'll ask you flat out:
mhm.
do you really know what the hell is going on outside of your toothbrush sitting in your
No,
bathroom?
because
And
I choose to isolate myself from that. I don't partake. I don't play
no,
that game.
but regardless, okay, so your decision is totally fine. But as a fundamental fact, even if you chose to partake, either way, unless you're sitting in the Pentagon round table with the big
Yeah,
screens and stuff,
you can't do that. No. I mean, you can't know. And there's a certain amount that you're never going to know. And there's a certain amount that you don't have a right or a need to know. And but you can only be as inquisitive as you can be. If you want to know what's going on a local level, you'll go to the town council meetings or the city council meetings or the county council meetings,
that's fair. Yeah.
you know. But if you're not that inquisitive or just don't have time, don't have the desire, you're kind of at their mercy, because the only information you're going to get is, and this is important, the only information you're going to get is the information they want you to have. And it doesn't matter what your source is, you are only hearing what they decide to tell you.
Right. Well, and it's also useful to say again, they could say tomorrow that a whole continent was swallowed up in war,
Mm-hmm.
and people here would be because of that report will be outraged, and but there's
Yeah.
nothing they can unless there's if it's true. It just we don't know any of these things. But granted, locally, at best, you can
Mm-hmm.
take care of your area
Yeah.
or understand your
You
area.
can educate yourself on your area. Most
At
people don't
best,
most people don't know who the mayor of their town is, or who their city councilman is, or even what district within the city that they're in, and who represents that district. You know, most folks don't know who's the president of the school board that their kids go to. I've never been to a school board meeting, things like that, because we have lives. We don't have time to do every single thing and study every single aspect of what's going on in our local area. Some people do, most folks don't. When you get off at 5 o'clock, you want to decompress, sit down in front of the boob tube and wait for dinner to get done. And when that's done, you get up, go to the table, and do that. It just depends on you, your personality, and your level of just how inquisitive you are, how
yeah.
much you want to know. Because
but it
if you want it, you won't let anything stand in your way.
but you do. You tell me. You do agree fundamentally that we don't have certainty on what is told to us
No, we don't.
in a
Again,
general sense. I mean, if it's a
yeah.
specific thing, but like in a general sense, I mean, we are at the disposal of
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we
of
are. We're at the disposal of the people who provide the information.
Mhm.
We are at their mercy. It's always been that way. It's
And there's
easy to say. It's easy to say that XYZ bank on Main Street was robbed today. You know there's more to the story than that.
right.
But it's real easy to say XYZ bank on Main Street was robbed today. Over to sports.
And there's two. I guess the last thing I'll say, as we're sort of approaching the mark roughly.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know, any other thing that you might want to add, but I think that well, heck, I lost it when I looked at the clock. I lost the darn thought, and it was a good point somewhere in there,
Don't
but
watch
I
the
lost the
clock. It
darn.
won't. Don't watch the clock. It won't move.
I I watched the freaking clock, and it totally like I saw the number and it changed,
Mm-hmm.
and as it changed, it wiped all the memory banks clear. Um, but it was going to be a good one, or I think, or at least in my mind, it was. I don't know, I guess as a concluding thought, um, human beings are incredible because human beings created the AI.
Hmm.
Human beings are conflicted. We saw a little conflicted here when I brought up a specific scenario, and you shared things that I didn't appreciate. And I
Well,
felt,
don't take it as a personal insult because it was not meant as a personal insult.
yeah, but so look, so so honor, um, when it comes to interactions with people, at least my so you take your friends, loved ones, at face value with the things they share. That's one thing. Um, but in a scenario where there's something greater than, let's say,
Okay,
something wild and stuff outside of the family structure or friend structure, just intimate groupings. Um, there's a lot of stuff out there floating around, and it could be any topic.
sure.
Um, you have people that are hard asses, that
Hmm.
are fine line, which is kind of where I was going with the being strict with will show and stuff. And then you have suspension of disbelief because we have to get on with it. And
Hmm.
I think that all these things are available to all humans and used by all humans, depending on how they feel about the topic or what their beliefs are about a certain topic. So if it's, be it lizard people or some government plot to make turn everybody into zombies or whatever the case, some people might have a particular leaning towards one thing or the other, and evidence. I guess the rigidity of cold cut evidence, that idea that I was bringing forth, and mixed with this AI, um, like, do we believe our eyes and stuff? Um, you know, we have to suspend the, in order to be human beings that we are, and not go crazy. We have to, at one point, suspend this belief in certain things,
Sure.
and we do have a
Because we
gradient
have to get along with life.
because we have to get along with life, right? But it depends on the subject, and this is where it gets in the weeds. Whether it's some sort of, in 1968, the bombing of such and such of a place. Well, that was actually a plot with this, like, just a bunch of stuff. One person might have their particulars, and they'll push that number. And in all of this, when you get down to the dry cut, this, and that, there's nothing as good as having evidence, which you always point at, um, in front of you and say, well, this is why this happens, and this is like what happened in that video, what he did.
Hmm.
But if you want to push it and push it, um, you would ask for the documentation. Such, and most people are not going to do that. They're just going to accept what's offered, and they'll judge whether it's true or not in whatever way they do. Um, and that's perfectly fine depending on the subject. If
Sure.
it's a benign subject, some subject, and so you have specialties and stuff, and that's humanity. So I think the AI will convince a lot of people, even us, given the right set of circumstances, where we watch something and we believe it, because it's so well done. I think that's it's. I think either believe it, or I think we're headed towards disbelief.
I think you're right. I think you're right in a lot of aspects. And the reason I think we're heading towards disbelief is because of things like what we opened the show with, because we're seeing how easy it is, or how easy, not it is, but how easy it's becoming to create things that never happened. But you have video and you have audio. Looks like the Beatles, sounds like the Beatles. How is that not the Beatles? Well, it's not the Beatles because that song didn't exist until I thought of it.
Yeah,
The Beatles didn't make it. But I can see right there that's the Beatles. John, Paul, George, Ringo. No,
yeah.
it's not. Yeah, those are the images of the Beatles, but they never sang that song because that song didn't exist in John Lennon or George Harrison's lifetime. That song did not exist. Therefore, they couldn't be playing it or singing it.
We're gonna deal with these problems,
Yes, they will come.
but like us,
Hmm.
we're I don't want to say it like that, but we're kind of like the generation prior, where we've had enough of the preceding way of the world. People being born now will be living in this and dealing with that. Um, and we're going to get a tail end of that development. Um, if it's like it is now, who knows what it's going to be in the future? Um, I'm sure humans, if they get, if it becomes a thing,
Mhm.
they'll burn the frickin' towers down. They'll. I'm sure that at some point humans will become so ornery that if something is pushed
Well,
too much,
I mean, we could go on forever about this, but I think we should save it for another podcast episode because that
Mhm.
starts to get into a Wall-E type of existence where we never leave our houses. We just live a virtual life with a headset on,
Yeah,
you know, because we can create any world we want to. Where you're married to Marilyn Monroe and you've got 4 kids in this virtual world,
yeah.
you know. Jim Dockrell said, "What about Pete Best?" Well, see, that's WrestleMania 6,357. Pete Best versus Ringo Starr, and the winner of that cage match goes on to record "Ticket to Ride."
I'll watch that.
You and me both. How could you not?
It's kind of I watched a few of the videos and I thought that they were pretty shocking because of that creep factor that you mentioned
Mhm.
before.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was like, oh, okay,
Is that
I dismissed it. But the implications are huge.
is that just us? The creep factor, I mean, because George Harrison is dead. You know that John Lennon is dead. But to see them up there in whatever attire, be it back in the early 60s or, 63, 64, or is this 68, or is this 72, or is this something that could have been projected as to how they would look in 2023? Because if you can create George Harrison singing a song, why couldn't you create what he would look like in 2023?
Right.
You know? So, I mean,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
We
Um,
will be dealing with the
oh yeah.
questions. I got no answers. I got nothing but questions.
Yeah. And there's little that we'll be able to do about it. And there's
Yeah,
much that we will believe that's not true that's put in front of us,
it's
and
going
we'll
to
have
happen.
no yeah, and we'll have no way of knowing. I mean, I'm assuming this. Here's the thing. Last thing I'll say. I would have to believe that the people providing the information, like you said,
Mhm,
are righteously putting forth what is true, but we already know
mhm,
in many instances that's not what they do.
mhm.
They don't provide in front of us. They omit various information points in order
Sure,
to um,
sure.
forward whatever narrative. And if that's the case, imagine even having video evidence and other things.
Yeah,
So it's a pretty crazy thing. Anyways, long story short, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed it. This is the Trampled Underfoot podcast show. We do touch on all sorts. I mean, we touch on all different types of subjects, and it goes where it goes. So we're eclectic in that way. Um, don't judge us by this one episode because there's many like it and others quite different as well concerning all sorts of topics, and you can catch those at the Trampled Underfoot podcast show on YouTube every Tuesday at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time. We have a website called trampledunderfootpodcast.com. You can catch our past episodes by going over there and pressing the Wayback Machine button. You can download the episodes, etc. And we have a Facebook page, Trampled Underfoot Podcast, on Facebook, where we sometimes post concerning the topics we discuss, like pictures, images, and links. And we're also sponsored by.
Harneo Media. Your web solution. Hey, look, if you're thinking about starting a website, how come you haven't done it yet? Well, maybe you don't know anything about running a website, same as me. That's where Steve Nealon over at Harneo Media comes in. He's the man, the myth, the legend. He will not only help you set up that website, he'll help you run it. I mean, as much or as little as you want to do, he can take care of you. He's very competitively priced. And one of the main benefits of working with Harneo Media is you are working with Steve, not some nameless, faceless person in a call center that you'll never talk to again in your life. You're dealing with Steve. So if you're even toying with the idea of the website, I'm here to tell you the first and only place I would stop would be Harneal Media. That's HARNEAL media.com.
All right.
Sponsor of Trampled Underfoot Podcast.com.
All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed the show. Um, be safe. Do the things you love, and we'll catch you here next time, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time. So have a safe one. Peace.
Peace.
See ya.
Be prepared.